Whereas for most people, they're probably barely going to be hitting six figures before they're hitting their limit. So I don't think it's a number kind of thing, but I do think it's a combination of energy and health and a number. I mean, there's a whole lot of things there, but I think at some point the growth will stop.
Are you feeling overwhelmed, stuck, or uncertain about how to grow your business without sacrificing what really matters most? Welcome to The Business You Really Want, the show for women ready to build a sustainable, fully aligned business. Aligned with what, you ask? Well, your values, your life. Seriously, it is possible. I'm Tonya Kubo, and along with business advisor extraordinaire Gwen Bortner, we're here to show you how. Today's episode, I am so excited about. It is our very first special mini-series. We're doing a 4-part series. I think it's going to be 4 parts. Gwen might make me cut it short because Gwen is the queen of efficiency. But we are talking about making the transition from being a solo entrepreneur or solopreneur to becoming the CEO your business needs. If you feel like you are stuck in the day-to-day grind, you're wearing every hat in your business, and trust me, we have all been there, but you want to learn to step into the CEO role. As my friend Mary Williams says, to put your CEO pants on and grow your company with confidence. This is going to be the episode for you. This is the one to save, come back to time and time again. My name is Tonya Kubo. I am joined today by my absolute favorite operations expert, Gwen Bortner. And in this series, what we plan to do is break down the critical elements of becoming a CEO, right? Because we know that we all start somewhere. I personally, outside of the work I do with Gwen, I'm a solopreneur. I don't even have a VA. And Gwen has a delightfully tiny team that I get to be a part of. And there's that process that you have to go through, and it starts with changing how you think. There's a bit of a mindset shift that sets the stage for everything else. And so, Gwen, what I'd like you to do is kick us off, because you have 40 years of experience, and I quite honestly do not. I want you to give us an example of somebody you know, could be a client, could be an associate, who you have witnessed successfully make that leap from solopreneur to CEO. And what I'm really curious about is if you could identify what you observed as the turning point for them.
So I think it's first important to clarify that even if you are a solopreneur, you can still also be a CEO at the same time, even if you never want anybody else on your team.
Okay.
And so it's like our friend Mary says, it's partly a mindset of how you're approaching the business, right? Because often we think of those as two separate things. If I'm one, I can't be the other, and vice versa. True. No, you probably can't be both at exactly the same time, but you can definitely be both without like changing the structure of your business or hiring 1,000 people or, any of those things. And one of my clients that has been a long-term client, quite honestly, I've watched really make a major transition. And when she started with me, she was a true solopreneur. There was no one else working with her in any capacity, I think. She might have had an intern, possibly, maybe 2, that were really, but they were truly interns. They were not even like, VA, this is what they're doing. It was someone to, to kind of come and follow in her footsteps. And so when we started working together, it wasn't long after we were working together, and helping her think about what has to be in place, because in her case, she did want to grow. She did not want to stay the size that she was. Not that that's the right answer. It was the right answer for her. But getting her to shift her mind about what does that mean? What do I need to do to make that happen? And she, like so many solopreneurs I know, immediately thought it was bringing in a lot more what I'm going to call low-level people. Interns, early stage VAs, the task people who are just going to do tasks. And the problem was, like with most solopreneurs, that there wasn't much that was outside of her brain that she could like hand to somebody. And so that makes hiring those people not nearly as effective because, you know, we can't,
Yeah,
and I know we're going to get into delegation later, but you got to have it outside of your brain.
it's true.
And so one of the things I suggested to her early on was you actually need to hire someone who can do some of the same level of work that you do. Now, this is a woman who is extremely specialized in a highly technical niche with lots of years of experience behind her. And she's like,
Right.
I can't possibly find anybody. It was like, yeah, but you need to start thinking about it. And there was this, it was one of the first times I saw it. It comes up now from time to time and we know what it is,
Yeah.
but there was this wall that came up in her face that was like, I am very uncomfortable. This seems very wrong. I am not happy with this comment. Luckily, she and I had a fairly good relationship even before we started working together, so it didn't throw me off too much. But I was a little nervous. It's like, oh, I don't know, just because, yeah, because
Right.
because I had made her extremely uncomfortable, and this is someone who does not get uncomfortable easy.
Well, it sounds to me, I mean, you were stretching her.
I was totally stretching her, and it took her only about 24 hours before she got to where she needed to be. I'm like, you know, receiving an email like 20, it's like, oh, I thought of 3 people. It's like, but it was that pulling out of where she was in the doing. It never occurred to her that someone else could be doing alongside her instead of for her.
Yeah. So what I like about that, you know, because I know, and I'm speaking for myself, because I've gone from solopreneur to building out agency to shrinking back for a bit. The reality of wearing all of the hats in your business holds you back. But when you go into a room and you talk about how, like, I'm so busy, I'm doing this, I'm doing that, all anybody ever wants to talk to you about is handing off those tasks, right? Get a VA to do it, da, da, da. You know, and if one more person tells me that I can have a VA, you know, work for me 20 hours a week for a whopping $100 a month, I might actually scream. And I get it, right? Because you're in the room and you're focused on the things that bother you. And you can't get out of it. So all you see are the tasks, right? And so what you did for this business owner was help them to appreciate that while the tasks may have been what was overwhelming, may have been what was using up their time, offloading those was actually going to be more work since everything was in their head. All that institutional knowledge was in their head. And in order to be able to step out of the business far enough to see the bigger picture, they actually needed somebody who could work without knowing everything that was in their head, that had their own head of stuff to bring to the table.
That was similar enough that there was going to be a shorthand communication instead of a very detailed communication.
Okay. Yeah, no, I like that. So, what I'd like to sort of address next, because I think this is a really good launching pad, is why is it so important to make the mindset shift from doing everything yourself to stepping into the CEO role? Like, I understand, you know, you just made a great example of the actual practicality of doing it. But like in that 24-hour period in the story that you told us, like there had to be some leaps and bounds being made inside her brain. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, her brain works really fast. So for most people, that would have been a week to a month kind of process. And I wouldn't have felt bad about that at all. I mean, that would be like completely normal. That you know, the fact that it took her like, and typically is like a 24 to 48 hour turnaround time, and then it's like, okay, I'm there. She's a bit of a unicorn for that. You know, that's one of the things, and I get it. But the thing that was going on was her getting comfortable with, but they're hiring me, and now someone else is doing the work. which I think is a big deal for all of us. Raising my hand here,
Samesies.
right? When we have been the primary deliverer, is that even a word? Deliverer of services, because we've also been marketing ourselves, right? And so what if I'm not the one delivering it? Does it still count? Particularly if I'm not advertising myself as an agency where you're hiring other people to help in the process, right? Because I don't advertise myself as an agency because I'm not an agency. Right. But that doesn't mean you don't also sometimes consult with my clients.
That's true.
But that was also a step. That was not that was not an automatic, well, of course you're going to. That was not just a given, right?
Right.
So that's a shift when you're moving from that solopreneur world into that CEO world. And even though I still deliver most of the services, I don't know, 85, 95%. I mean, a big chunk of the services.
95% for sure.
Yeah. So from that standpoint, I probably still really am a solopreneur, even though we do have a tiny team. But the CEO part is being able to say, when am I actually not necessarily the best person to be delivering the services?
Yeah.
Right? When we're in that solopreneur mindset, we are always the best person to be delivering the services. But the CEO mindset says, am I? Or is there possibly somebody else or something else or a tool, or, I mean, you can fill in lots of blanks there, but is me doing this really, really the best thing, not only for the business, but for the customer as well?
Okay. That feels like it could be a hard pill for some people to swallow, right? That working with them personally may not be in the best interests of the business or of the client. I'm wondering though, I mean, that's a big difference, I think, between being a solopreneur and a CEO. What do you think? Like, I know there's other differences. What would you say are the top two next differences between?
One of them is being able to actually step back, find time, and think strategically about the whole business, not just either the part that you're really good at or the part that you love or the part that makes you happy, but at the whole business, which there's inevitably always some elements that are not your favorite part. That's just the nature of these things. I don't know anybody that says I love every little aspect of my business. I don't think that exists. There probably is something, but I doubt it. But being able to look at all of that strategically as a whole, and with some objectivity, which of course we can't truly be objective about things because we're in the middle of it, and I mean that's a thing. So that would probably be, to me, the next thing. And I mean all of these are kind of parallel, right? They're all right. They're all kind
it's not a 1, 2, 3 order. I mean, it really is like it's this and that and that.
Yeah. And then the other is being able to start seeing how to create, and I always loathe using the word balance because people always think of this. And to me, balance is not that. It's this, doing this, doing this, doing this, doing this. But being able to create balance over time, which means sometimes we're putting more effort here, but then we're putting less effort there. But then later we're putting more effort here. And when I say balance, being able to think about balance holistically, not for the entire business, and especially if you're a solopreneur, for you too. Something I hear at Genius Network is they talk about the $1 million racehorse. And when you're a solopreneur, you are the $1 million racehorse. You are the one that's actually creating the money. And if you had $1 million racehorse, would you run it every day until it was worn out every single solitary day so that you killed it? Or you made it lame, or you did, no, you would not. You would train it and you would run it and you would put it in races, but you would also give it time off and you would make sure it ate well and you would make sure that it was sleeping properly and it was doing all of the other things too. Right. And so we forget that, especially as a solopreneur, we forget that we are, using this example, the $1 million racehorse.
Got it. Yeah. That's good.
And so that's part of the balance. You can't not ever have the horse run, because then it's also not a $1 million racehorse. But you can't have it run constantly either.
Yeah. Okay. That's good. Like I said, I always use the goose that lays the golden eggs. And I say, well, if you cook the goose, you have no eggs.
Right.
And sometimes we're guilty of cooking our own goose.
Yeah.
So we've got the differences, which I think those are three. I mean, I know I can't think of any others that I have seen across the board like I see those three. I'm wondering, is it possible, I was going to ask this a different way, but is it possible to grow without shifting your thinking from solopreneur to CEO? Or does everybody eventually have to come to terms with this?
I think the answer is, if you don't, you're going to hit a limit. The limit is not necessarily, I can't tell you what each limit is.
Right.
Right. Because I can imagine a limit where someone has $1 million business as a solopreneur, and is not thinking like a CEO. I mean, I don't know what that is right off the top of my head, but I can totally imagine that. Whereas for most people, they're probably barely going to be hitting six figures before they're hitting their limit. So I don't think it's a number kind of thing, but I do think it's a combination of energy and health and a number. I mean, there's a whole lot of things there, but I think at some point the growth will stop if you aren't thinking like a CEO.
Yeah, because when I think of adopting the CEO mindset, I think of creating a process or a system or a routine around consistently planning for the long term. Like, not just thinking about how do I get through the month, how do I pay the bills, or if, some businesses are great with cash flow, but what kind of business do I want to have in a year? What kind of business do I want to have in 5 years?
Yeah.
Relying more on data to drive the decisions than intuition. I love my gut instinct. I'm not going to lie, Gwen. I love it. But I find that my business has fewer peaks and valleys when I let data drive my decision making versus just going on gut instinct. And then I was also thinking that, it's the systems. It's going back to the example you made. When all the information lives inside your head, if for any reason you have to take time off, good reasons or bad reasons, the business can't move forward because nobody can read your mind.
Right.
Would you add anything else?
No, I mean, I think, and I do think that's why there is limited growth until you start thinking like a CEO.
Okay.
And not that it's too limited, because there are a lot of people who don't really take a CEO mindset that have a business that makes them happy. So it's not like that is the right answer. But if you're feeling stuck, if you're feeling like you want to be able to do more, like you should be doing more, it could be not having that CEO mindset, that you've gotten too caught in the delivery, in the action, in the doing, and not being able to step far enough away to do the strategic thinking. And quite honestly, we talk about strategic thinking like it's an all you have to do is. Like, it's super easy to think strategically. It is not. And if you haven't had lots of opportunities to be exposed to it and to experience it and to go through that process, that's a really hard thing. And so I think that's another reason people get caught, is because they're told that they're supposed to think strategically, and they're like, okay, I guess that's what I'm doing. I mean, like, how would you know?
Right.
I mean,
well, it's how would you know? And I talk about this all the time with you is, so often people don't understand the difference between strategy and tactics anyhow. So when you tell them to think strategically, many times they actually think you're telling them to just map out more day-to-day
More
how
things
to
do.
yeah, more hands-on stuff. And you're like, not what I meant. Words I said, but not what those words meant. So what do you think prevents most women? I mean, I say women because that's our listenership, but what prevents most women from stepping into that CEO role? Like, what's inside their head, inside their heart, do you think? I don't know.
So this is, a big generalization because that's what generalizations are. This doesn't mean absolutely
By
everybody.
definition, they are big in general. Yeah,
Big in
they don't
general,
apply to
which means it
everybody.
doesn't necessarily apply to everybody. But we are obviously we are and still have been in a patriarchal system. And part of that, system is women have been more valued for doing than they have for thinking. And being strategic is more about thinking and less about doing. And so we get in our minds that if we're spending time doing strategic things and I can't show you something for it,
Right.
it must not have been valuable and it was probably a waste of time.
So I'm going to ask you to say more about that, but let me explain why first. So whenever I hear other people talk about, like, what's preventing me, what's my head trash around thinking more strategically, spending more time on my business than in the business, what I hear said around the rooms is I hear people say, well, that's imposter syndrome. Oh, you don't mean to be, but you're being a bit of a control freak. You're just scared of losing control of your business. Some people will say you just have an unhealthy attachment to things. But what you're saying isn't actually any of those things. You're not describing imposter syndrome. You're not describing control-based fears. And you're definitely not describing like pink puffy heart love towards super like certain tasks. I mean, what you're talking about is deeper and yet resonates on a much deeper level than the idea of imposter syndrome does to me. So say more about this idea of not getting valued for thinking versus doing, and why, if that's true, then why is the thinking so important?
Well, historically, the men have done all the thinking and they make the plans and then the women implement them.
Okay.
Right? I'm going to go like back a couple hundred years when farming was a big deal because often it was the way that you actually survived. Right.
Right. And you and me have, farming-ish backgrounds. So
we have we have farming backgrounds, but I'm really talking about, several hundred years ago. And what you would typically see were large families because what they were actually creating were hired hands.
I was going to say workforce.
They were creating workforce. I mean, it's really part of the process, right? But the planning was left to dad, and mom was about the implementation of the doing, of raising them and getting them capable enough to start taking direction from dad to do the next set of things once they were old enough, that they could carry a heavy load or wouldn't, chop off a finger or, all of those things. Right. And so there is this setup that as a woman, I do what I'm told. And even though I'm telling myself, it's more important for me to do the thing that I'm telling myself to do than it is to think about what it is that needs to be done. Gosh, that sounds convoluted when I say it, but I really think it's true.
Yeah, no, it does. But I'm going to ask you, I mean, just to prepare you, I really want some practical steps of how to do what you're describing.
So I think the big thing first is you've got to be okay not producing something for a chunk of time on a semi-regular basis. Now, I don't mean like every day.
Right. Okay.
Because, I still do a lot of activity during the day. I do not always do strategic, thinking. I mean, I'm doing lots of strategic thinking, but on the behalf of others. I'm not doing a lot of strategic thinking. I'm not CEOing in my own business, all the time. But saying, how often do I need to be? When should I be doing this? And based on a lot of different factors, you can figure out different timeframes. But at least once a quarter, you should be taking a chunk of time. When I say a chunk of time, I mean like a half a day.
Okay.
To
That's
really
helpful.
to kind of say, and it may be more, but a half a day to say, what do I want? What's going on? What are these bigger picture things? What have I what's the data I've gathered thus far? What can I look at and do some analysis on and make some decisions that I can do as a predictive activity that will have a relatively high likelihood of being true. I mean, all of these things are a bit crystal ball-y, and so we don't always have like the answer, but the more data, the more times you do it, the more accurate it becomes. So at least quarterly, but depending on what all's going on with your business, the speed of it, if it's growing, if there's lots of changings, it may need to be once a week. It may need to be more often. One of the things that we do that I find really useful is we do an accountability process that's weekly. So we're doing a little of this every week.
Right.
And then we have monthly staff meetings, which allow us to do a little more of it once a month. And then we have quarterly planning meetings for our staff, which allow us to go deeper once a quarter. And so it's not like there's a one and done answer for us. And our particular process may not be appropriate for everyone. I'm not saying that it is. But we're taking a little bit of time to get out of the details and think higher on a regular basis and to look at the bigger picture of things.
Okay.
And setting aside that time and getting comfortable with not producing anything.
So here's the hard question, Gwen. I love that. And thank you for walking through a process, because even if the weekly, monthly, quarterly cadence doesn't work for somebody, I think our listeners can find a place, like find at least one aspect of that could work for them. But that sounds hard. And I know you're smiling because it is hard. So I feel like you need to tell me, I want to say you need to sell me on this, but that's not really your personality. I want you to tell me how my life will be better for doing it. That's what I want. Like, how is my life going to be better and my business going to be better if I do this hard thing that, by your example, I may not actually feel like is real work. And other people around me may not see it as such.
Most people won't see it as such. So just be okay with that. Know that.
just suck it up. Got it.
Yeah, just let that go. Because if they are not in a similar kind of role, they will not understand the value of it. So just leave it at that. But the thing that you will start being able to do, and this is another one of those things that it takes practice. So the first time is not going to have this like, oh my gosh, my entire business changed because I took 4 hours to do this. That is not the way this works. Right. It's incremental, and we start getting better and better and better. And you'll find some tools that you could use. I mean, there's all sorts of things that you may want to do depending on who you are and what your personality is. You may want to meditate before you start so that you kind of clear your mind. Some folks want to do yoga. Some folks will walk while they do a lot of this. And so it's not like there's a perfect answer of how you are going to do this. But the key thing is you will start having thoughts that your brain hasn't had space for before. Okay. Because it was worried about, I've got to get this thing done and this thing done and this thing done and this thing done. And I'm going to use my perfect example of it for me that happened about 2-ish years ago, where I was doing my quarterly planning retreat and I was thinking, it's time for me to find someone that's a really more of an executive level assistant, a much higher assistant. I've been hiring VAs and they weren't quite delivering what I needed to deliver. And I realized it's like, I need to take some of my own, my own advice. And I was like, oh, but gosh, finding that person's going to be really hard. And I was thinking about this, and this was not my first rodeo. I've been doing this quite a bit.
Right.
And all of a sudden what popped into my head was, oh my God, I should ask Tonya. And so, but it was truly during one of those times. Now, you and I had been meeting regularly and talking regularly at that point for a couple years, right? So it wasn't like I didn't know who you were, that we just met, that I had no idea what your skill set was, that I didn't know much about you, that all of the things that would seem obvious, like why had I not thought of Tonya? None of those things were true. It was that I hadn't had space enough in my brain for my brain to actually say, I've been trying to point out to you, you should think about talking to Tonya about this. Because as soon as it came into my brain, it was like, oh my God, that is the best idea ever. Now, I didn't know if he would be interested.
Right.
But I also knew the second I mentioned it to my husband, he had the exact same, it was like, oh my God, that's the best idea ever. But he also knows you. And he could have come up with the idea. It's not his job to be strategic about my business. But it's the exact same thing. You've got to give your brain space to have these ideas that when you have them, you're like, how did I not think of that before? But it's because it's been busy doing other stuff.
Right. Well, and what I love about that example, aside from the fact that it was about me, I like being the answer to a longstanding problem, is we had the conversation, and in 6 months of working together, you had enough space and I had enough of a handle on the business to be like, actually, you don't need an executive assistant, right? You need a thought partner in your business. You need the other side of the coin. And then we were able to develop from there, but we never could have gotten there if you hadn't made a point to give yourself that important thinking time. I don't know who it is. I'm sure somebody listening will tell me who made this quote, or I'll Google it afterward, but it's the time to think the unthunk thought.
Yes. Oh, exactly. That is exactly it.
So I think that is so important. Okay. This is really, really good, because I think too often we get told what to do, and nobody ever takes the time to tell us how our life will be better on the other side. And so when it gets hard, it's just easier to not push through, to be quite honest. It's easier if you don't have somebody constantly pointing out to what the other side can look like. So I'm going to end us here, because this is a series. So this is just part one, folks, just part one. In today's episode, what we've done is we've explored the differences between being a solopreneur and stepping into the CEO role. And as Gwen was very careful and very adamant about pointing out, it is okay if you always want to be a solopreneur. However, you are still going to need to put your CEO pants on every now and then. Quarterly, monthly, weekly, depends on your business, depends on what you're doing. We've discussed the importance of making that mindset shift, because it is the longest distance you'll ever have to cross is the space between your ears. So making that mindset shift for your business growth. We talked a little bit about what holds you back, but honestly, what Gwen mentioned about just the fact that it's hard to feel like thinking is as valuable as doing, right? So that piece, right, holding you back, that prevents you from embracing the hard thought work that is required to become a true CEO. And then how making that shift can actually bring you more freedom, which is what all of us want in our business. That's how we get the business that thrives, even when we're not doing everything all by ourselves. And so if any of these topics resonate with you and you want some tailored advice, we would love to connect with you. You can visit us online at thebusinessyoureallywant.com. You can check out the show notes, the description if you're watching us over on YouTube. But make sure that you join us for our next episode in the Solo to CEO series, because that's when we are going to discover the essential leadership skills that you need to manage a team, even if the only person on that team is you. Thanks for tuning in to The Business You Really Want with Gwen Bortner. I'm Tonya Kubo, reminding you that sustainable success is within reach. Make sure to subscribe to the show and visit thebusinessyoureallyWant.com for more resources. Until next time, keep dreaming big and acting with intention.